let's talk about the economy. We're joined on the program by Mr. Tope Fashua, Special Advisor to President on Economic Affairs, joins us from our Abuja studio. Mr. Fashua, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Kadi. It's good to be here. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I'm sure you've been following all of the events around the economy. The interest rates cut, well, very minimal, some would say, from the CBN, the inflation figures. But I wanted to start on this very important note that touches on cash flow. Let me talk like a business person. Looking at the budget defense at the National Assembly, and you hear ministers saying that, well, we don't have money. Money has not been released. Contrary to what was budgeted, you hear the Accountant General saying, well, if we had the money, we would give it to them, but we don't have it. The ways and means are not there. The money is not coming in. And just for proper context, let me list the ministers that have said we didn't get anything for 2025, or at least we didn't get as much. The Ministry of Health said 36 million was what was actually released. We had the Minister of Interior as well, the Minister of Justice, Power, Transportation, Women Affairs, Social Development, all of them complaining of either zero or little release of capital budget allocation for 2025. So the question is, where is all of this subsidy savings? Where is it going to?
Oh, well, thank you very much. Good question. Well, I think the first thing to note is that, the government came in 2023. There was a budget already approved by the Buhari government running already. And but then that led to several overlaps. Last year, 2025, was when part of 2023 budget was still running, part of 2024 budget, in fact, most of 2024 budget was running. It was a challenge. When the ministers talk about non-receipt of funds, of course, they are concerned about the capital budget. So 2025, most of what was achieved was 2024 budget. So the ministers are correct because, they're sitting right there at their desk. They know what comes in and what does not. That 2025 budget has been rolled into 2026 mostly. So this overlap. Of course, Mr. President had to present a bill towards the end of last year to repeal and reenact the 2023 and 2024 budget, sort of killing those budgets at that point in time. The thing about budgeting is that when a yearly budget is made, it's a law which must be implemented. So you cannot just casually move on to the new year, except the law around budgeting is changed. So I think most of this is really what happened. But of course, you will not hear places like ministries like works, like aviation say that. So to your question, where is the money? The savings is actually a lot of it is at the state level. I just came back from Ondo State where a lot of infrastructure development is going on, and the state is actually, sitting on quite a bit of cash as well, and not only Ondo State, many states around the country. We had a NEC conference a couple of weeks back at which the Governor Dapo Abiodun, who was representing the chairman of the Governors Forum, Governor Abdulrazak of Kwara State, mentioned that, look, people have been asking about this question, where's the money? Come to the states and you see the infrastructure. Of course, it's a different ballgame if you don't like the infrastructure they're doing. Some will say, is it the road we are going to eat and all of that? But look, we need this hard infrastructure. In those states particularly I'm mentioning, a lot of road developments in the south senatorial district, even in the north in Akoko area, of course in the central in Akure. I saw quite a few of that myself, and road lighting projects, solar projects everywhere. The money is there. The money is at the state level. It's the states that people live. So I think the problem we've had is there's been continues to be this huge focus, this keen focus on the federal, and I think what the reforms of the moment are doing is to actually redirect that focus to where matters, where people live, which is at the state level. I think the sacrifices of this government, of the government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is to say that, look, let's recalibrate this, let's take the money to where the money is really needed. And of course, some of the states have their allocations having increased about 3 times, and many of them are doing very well on their IGR as well. I did an analysis of the budgeting of the states between 2019 to date and between 2022 to date. States like Enugu has increased its budget by 1,400%. Lagos by 400%. Lagos is budgeting 4.2 trillion. As of last year, when the commissioner for budgeting in Lagos spoke last year, he said, look, we're not borrowing to run this 3 trillion budget. This year they're doing 4 trillion budget. They may have to borrow a little bit. But in fact, in 2024, the states paid down 42% of their global budget, of the global debt. So I think that we need to begin to look at the economy in a different way. It's not all about the federal government. The federal government may be taking on very large projects. And if you want to know where the money is at the federal level, of course, these projects that government is running, hard infrastructure projects, all the massive arterial roads that are being constructed, repositioning of several, infrastructure projects around the country. This is where the money is. We're not saying that we have a perfect situation, but I think that what we're looking at is, rather than just having indiscriminate spending and maybe going into recurrent and all of that, the government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is focusing on infrastructure.
So, Mr. Fashola, let's talk about what people may be saying. This may not be everybody. For those who are concerned about the spending and are worried about the fact that government comes to say, oh, we're spending this, we're doing that. And I kind of agree with you that it's time for us to look at the subnationals. Some of those subnationals, we know is federation money, but we've also done our own analytics to see that some of them are not innovative enough. If not for the federal government, literally they'll go belly up, and the argument about resource control will come in. So my first question about the subsidy, when we had subsidy before it was removed, because it wasn't budgeted for in 2023, it was budgeted for till June, and then the president came and made that pronouncement. We understand that the crude that is accruable to the NNPC, whether it's through the PSC, whatever form of contract they have, it's about maybe 700,000 barrels, and then what comes to for the swap deal for the NNPC to get all the subsidies was about maybe 300,000 barrels, which, depending on what currency you're using to convert, should come about maybe $20 million maybe per day. So we expect that for subsidy to have ended, for that wage bill to have been taken off from the federal government or the federation account, those monies will come back. So maybe you can explain to us, if you are familiar with that particular part of the conversation as far as those subsidy monies are concerned. That's why we're asking, where is the money? Because we know how those monies used to come in, or the underwriting as claimed by the NNPCL. And then the second part of my question will be, is it a question of misdirecting expenditure? That's why some people don't feel the impact of governance, maybe at the subnational or the federal level, so they keep complaining, or there's something we're missing entirely?
Well, okay, no, let me start with this last question, and I'll go to the NNPC crude oil issue. The point is, look, if you avail yourself in this country of the opportunities that are bound, if you're not part of the creation of value, you can't expect that the money will flow to you. So a lot of people who complain, look, if infrastructure projects are going on, what have you proposed? If you're not proposing anything to the private sector or creating value, adding value. I mean, we had the Ondo State Investment Summit a couple of days back. We had the young billionaires coming to speak. I could mention their companies there, John Vent, Sunbet, young people, 30-something-year-old boys that are turning over trillions of naira in a year in agriculture. In fact, one of them said, look, Ondo State is the best kept secret. We don't even want Lagos people to know what we're doing here. It's amazing. A young man who has taken over the old Iloluji Koko, the one in Okutupupa, the one in Owo, and you'll be shocked that, look, we live in the same country, So look, if you're not part of value creation, there's a lot going on, even private sector, business to customer. At that level, people are creating value. Nigeria is an open sesame. Why are foreigners coming to this country when some of the young Nigerians want to run out of the country? So you may not be, it may be difficult to help someone who is not ready to create value but wants to keep criticizing. In fact, the more you criticize everything around you, the more you push away those opportunities from you. Because those who can assist, those who can pull you up will not be endeared to you. And that said, so let's talk about the NNPC and the crude oil. Look at the last the last executive order that Mr. President gave. Something that's unprecedented. A lot of people were at daggers drawn to say, oh, he has moved against the PIA and the Petroleum Industry Act, which was in play from 2000 to 2021 until it was enacted. Okay, we started that PIA sometime around when President Obasanjo was here. It wasn't enacted until 2021 when it was split into 4 to say, let's see how this thing can be done piecemeal. And when the law was put in place, people marketed it like it was the next best thing after sliced bread in Nigeria. However, what ended up being the case was that about 60% of everything Nigeria sold in crude oil actually disappeared into expenses and charges and all sorts of things, leaving the remaining 40% or thereabouts for the government and for the people of this country. Mr. President has said, no way, we are not going to continue to have that. We've been slaves to the system for too long. We're now going to see a scenario where money comes in directly and we know what we're getting. This is part of the reform. Now, this government is a government of reform. You mentioned the petroleum subsidy removal. About $10 billion was paid on the minimum. Averagely, $10 billion was lost to petroleum subsidy. Which is now, but the second problem we had was this PIA, which actually deprived Nigeria of the cash flow. Mr. President is worried about the cash flow, and I said, you know what, let us look at this executive order. Let everybody sit up, let NNPC sit up, make or break, let's see how this goes. So now is the time. And I want to also add that the reforms around taxation, the tax reform, and the revenue reform, some of which are same Nigerians, a lot of Nigerians, especially the intellectual, quote and unquote, have tried to move against that. You don't want it to succeed. What that does is actually also to bring accountability to the cash flow accruing to this country. Going forward, every payment made to an MDA, to a government-owned enterprises, is going to be systemized. It will go into the system, everybody will see it. So it's not the very little room for hanky-panky, very little room for befuddlement. Money coming in, we don't know where it goes to. So now it takes time for some of these processes to work. But I think that Mr. President has done the right thing, if not only for his own administration, even for administrations that will come, for this country, to ensure that we do things the right way.
If I may comment, I don't know whether you've answered my question on the first part. I hear you on the part of getting involved in the system to be able to benefit from the system, but the way people assess performance is how, especially in terms of prices of goods and services, access to things. That's where I was going to with that particular question. Because if it's populated significantly and is scaled enough, in terms of the chunk and the scaling, it should be able to scale down numbers considerably. On the issue of the PIA and all of that, I don't know whether I really answered my question as to where the money is, but I'll just leave it at that.
Maybe your question is a bit twisted. I thought I answered it. I answered the PIA part. You said something about the way people are pricing things. Do I get that right, But maybe the audio isn't too good at this point.
I'm saying that
are we talking about inflation now?
If government is spending right, government is spending, I don't think that's debatable. If government is spending right based on needs, we should be able to feel significantly for those who feel that they are not feeling the impact in terms of, let's say, pricing.
That's what I don't get you. Jeff, I think, I answered you correctly. Brother, man, this is 2026. If you don't provide value, you don't get anything. You resume at your work every day. This is Channels TV. People avail themselves to get the jobs here. If you get a job here, you do it well. If you are not, if you do your work well, nobody will lay you off. You'll be part of it. I can wager that the salaries of people that work in channels are probably doubled or tripled in the last 5-6 years, or even in the last 2 years. That is value creation. Everybody has to avail themselves. But then again, you see, people will always complain. There will always be people who will complain. There are young people who are even working as service providers online to foreign countries, companies in this country, in the BPO space, business process outsourcing. There's a lot. The workspace has changed. We now live in the day of artificial intelligence. It's not for people to sit at home and be complaining. And I said it extensively. I mentioned it here. Your attitude is what will determine what you get at the end of the day, whether people are calling you in, artificial intelligence or not, to come and be part of a process that creates value. It's all about value creation now. So some people will say they're not seeing. I also mentioned, I gave you examples right here of people, young people who are doing tremendously well in this country. So the point is this, if you want to go into the sociological aspect of it, are people hoping to get something for nothing? Do people want to sit at home and get something for nothing? And we know who we are in Nigeria. We like the good life. But now more and more we're being told that, look, we need to reposition ourselves in order to be part of the value creation to get the kind of life that we want to live in this country. So people, when you say people, that's an amorphous statement. You can walk on the street and interview anybody. You don't know how he has also been part of his own problem. And you can now project that to say the government is bad and the country is bad. The country is improving, certainly. The right reforms have been put in place. Petroleum, subsidy gotten rid of. We're now getting used to it. Fuel price went up to more than 1,000. Now, about 1,300. Now it's back to 800. I was in Accra yesterday. I saw 800 and something. We've done the one on the Naira. Naira went to 1,900. Is back going to 1,300. Perhaps 1,200. Is projected to go to 1,000. As it were, So we've had the tax reform, which is even more profound. Nigerians will have to come to terms with the fact that a good country is a product of its own people and how its people cooperate with that country. We've now had the petroleum, crude oil sales reforms, which the executive order has been signed and all of that. Look, it's all for all of us to position and expect even better times. Thank you.
A good country is also a fulfillment, of the social contract part of the, government, not just the people. Let's stay with the where is the money question for a bit. And I'd like to follow up on some of your opening comments when you referred to how there's over-concentration on the federal government and less on the states. And you talk about how there are some developments in the state. But it depends on the state that you're looking at. In the last couple of weeks, we've had time to focus on infrastructure development in some states, and there is a huge concern about an infrastructure deficit in some states, despite the increased allocation to the states by the federal government. That's on the one hand. Where is the money? There's been a disclosure that only 36 million naira out of a 2.8 trillion naira budget for the Ministry of Health was what was allocated in 2025. So talk to us about why that is, especially against the backdrop of the fact that we do not see the same lack of funding for institutions such as the executive. We do not see a lack of funding for institutions, such as the National Assembly, for instance. So why is it human capital development that is suffering?
No, well, again, I explained earlier on that for 2025 budget, in the year 2025, most of what was achieved was for the 2024 budget. At some point, even it was 2023, 2024 running. 2023 got rid of, 2024 became the main focus. So for 2025, even by December, we had a challenge that, look, what was going to happen with the capital budget for 2025? It's not for lack of money, but it's a matter of law. I told you, I said, look, when you enact that's why it's called the appropriation bill, becomes an appropriation act, it must be implemented whether you like it or not. It's a hard and fast rule. And so when you have a 2024 budget, it must be, if you don't finish with that one, you can't jump to the next one. So the issue then becomes, these overlaps, how do we get rid of it? And I mentioned the fact that maybe at some point in time, if it continues, because now part of 2025 budget capital is in this year, 2026, and that's what will be the focus. The Minister of Health complained about getting that small amount of money because there wasn't any focus on capital budget for that ministry until late in December. But mind you, of course, a lot would have been achieved in 2024, and there are other projects that are going on. Mind you, the fact that, of course, for every budget in a country, even every year, there's budgets of course, on recurrent budget, there's budget for debt servicing, then there's budget for capital. These two, recurrent and debt servicing, must be adhered with. That is where salaries are and all of those kind of things. And those things have been done. And even some of the capital budget too, some of them, of course, stand to scrutiny. For example, buying laptop is seen as a capital budget, buying cars is seen as a capital budget. The issue becomes, we need to have much more scrutiny on that. Do we need cars every year? There are some capital budgets that occur every year. And the envelope budgeting system has not been very efficient, which we need to get out of at some point in time. So I think I've explained that severally to you. So in the new year, we see what happens. It's not for lack of fund, and I don't also agree with those who say that Nigeria should reduce our budget. This country, we're budgeting about $130 or even $100 per person per year on everything. We have one of the lowest per capita budgets in the world. But the only thing that will fix that is more revenue coming in, which is the reason behind the tax and revenue reforms that we have. The thing that will fix that is the kind of executive order that has come in on crude oil sales, minding the fact that ab initio, when you talk about Nigeria, I think I think it was Aide that opened with that. When you talk about Nigeria is selling 1.7 million barrels of crude oil every day at maybe $70 per barrel, and you say, wow, Nigeria is making so much money. Please, it is very erroneous. It is very erroneous. Out of that 1.7 million barrels, Nigeria probably has about 35% of it, because you have to go into production with international oil companies and even some domestic companies, and you have to have a joint venture. Nigeria will have a percentage of the joint venture, or if it was a production sharing contract, Nigeria only has a percentage of that. It is part after the percentage, you now deduct all of the expenses of NNPC and the subsidiaries, which could be very substantial. The rest is what comes to Nigeria. Perhaps with that at 20% of that 1.7 million barrels that we're seeing. Very, very important. This is what Mr. President is concerned about. To say, you know what, that deduction that comes in after the Nigeria's share comes to it from the production, that deduction, how can we ensure that everything doesn't erode on expenses, from the Nigerian part of it, which is part producer, part regulator. So it's clear what's going on. And of course, I'm saying that given the reform the government has put in place, those reforms are yielding. They will even yield some more. And I believe that the cash flow issues will be a thing of the past. However, I'm also saying to you that if you want to see the evidence, you mentioned that the channels did some research. It would have been good to mention which states don't have the infrastructure that you cannot see. I mentioned to you the states that are doing good budgeting and, really projecting: Enugu State, Abia State, Lagos State, Kano State. Go to those states and you see the infrastructure. But however, if you're just a passerby who does not intend to add any value, or you're just sitting on social media criticizing, when in fact you don't even understand the challenge of leadership and how tough it can be. I'm not saying that our leaders are perfect. I'm not saying the state governors are perfect. I'm not saying Mr. President is perfect. But if you're just just a passerby who doesn't intend to add value, then you would always find fault in Nigeria. But if you are not, if you are adding value, in fact, a lot of people are watched with liquidity in this country, are watched with cash in this country, because they're adding value.
Because of time, just to wind down with this, we started off from where is the money? And it's a very important question. Touches on transparency, accountability. It is Nigeria's commonwealth. And I made mention of those ministers that said before Nigerians that say we've not gotten the monies we're meant to get. Some had budgets running to millions, billions. They only got 36 million. That's the Ministry of Health. And I mentioned that. So it's important to help Nigerians understand, okay, fine. If we are lagging behind, when is this going to be sorted on the one hand? So that's accountability. The transparency bit is, again, back to the subsidy conversation. You know, the under recoveries that we used to have before the president said subsidy is over was being paid for by, you know, barrels of crude under the, you know, the crude swap agreement, either direct sales, vendor, or what have you. Now, the challenge here is that the under recoveries that were cancelled, those barrels of crude, where are they? Where are they recorded? Are they recorded in FAC? Just so we get a better understanding of where this money is. I know you have explained some other points, but really help us understand that bit.
Well, if I get your question correct, you're talking about the under recovery of the past.
Yes.
Now, under recovery was just subsidy payment. So 2011, 2012, we were in this country under President Jonathan, and there was that attempt to remove subsidy. Say, listen, we're walking away from subsidy. Of course, there were riots because people felt that, look, you know, we were kind of sweeping a lot of things under the carpet. At that time, we realized that the central bank, the accountant general, and the NNPC were having different figures of subsidies being paid. It was later, I mean, we had 1.7 trillion, 1.8 trillion. Remember, Naira was maybe at 120 at that point in time, and Governor Sanusi was still there at CBN. And of course, that's over 10 trillion. Okay, and we saw all of the frauds that happened, and a few of those guys were prosecuted, you know. But then that went on, and it was supposed to be a scenario where subsidy had gone, but we started seeing what was called under recovery. Under recovery was just NNPC saying that, you know what, we have sold so much, and we have imported X number of petroleum, and in what we imported after
Mr.
we sold,
I understand the concept of under recoveries, and that's why I reference it. My question is, the barrels, I know, it's because of time. Where are they recorded? Are they recorded in FAC? Where are they right now? That's the question.
You need to understand the new kind of challenge that we have and the new kind of accounting that's going on. So under recovery is what it is. It's also subsidy, just a case of NNPC recording it as under recovery. Now is a time that not only as subsidy been outlawed, you know, as under recovery or in whatever shape it comes, but we are also seeing a scenario where Nigeria's importation of petroleum has reduced by about 40% because there's Dangote producing locally and a few other companies also. Nigeria's exports of crude has also reduced because we need to fulfill some of the local, you know, obligations. You know, so it's two ways. We've seen a reversal, a slight reversal of fortune. We intend to make that 100%. You know, so if you say where is the, there's no more under recovery as well. Of course, there are still some contracts that have been signed in the past that you have to pay with crude. We're hoping that will also pan out
Mr.
in the next couple of years.
There's crude, you know, for example, set aside to sort the under recoveries. So the crude set aside to sort the under recoveries, which is no more. The question is, where are they? But we have to anchor at this point. I think we can go back and forth on this one, but it borders on
the point is, like I said,
transparency.
Like I said, Kadi, you know, first of all, forget about under recovery. There may be crude set aside in a couple of years that will be gone, not only for
exactly, it's not gone right now. So where are they recorded?
Taken, like the Afri-Exim one. Sorry.
Well, Mr. Fashiwa, I guess this is a conversation we must have again so that we keep updating Nigerians on what exactly is going on, what they should expect. Because there's another budget for 2026, and there are concerns that if we've not done well with 2025, we have an ambitious one for 2026. How will we achieve it? But Mr. Tokwe Fashiwa, you have your job cut out for you.
We need larger budgets, actually. We need larger budgets in this country.
But we also need to meet the obligations of
the
those
Cashflow
budgets.
for us to do that. Thank you.
Mr. Fashiwa, Special Advisor to the President on Economic Affairs. Thank you for your time. And of course, speak to you in the coming days for part 2 of this. Thank you.
All right. Lovely. Thank you.
We'll take a moment now. When we return, by the way, if you have questions about this, send them in, right? Let's have a proper conversation in the coming days. But we'll be back after this. Stay with us.